Start recording again. Good morning. Peter Reese speaking to you from WNY Filed of Dreams recording studio and podcast center here in suburban North Buffalo. We're in the outskirts. Topic today is Bill's Stadium, which we all know is supposed to be downtown in Buffalo, but the politicians and the people who are spending our money don't seem to agree with that. Three distinguished guests here today: Andy Kulyk, Ryan Miller, Ben Siegel. And gentlemen, we're playing Hollywood Squares. We can see all four of us right now. Andy, why don't you start off, introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Andy Kulyk. I'm a local businessman. I have got the unique bragging rights of having attended a home game of each of the 124 franchises that play in the four North American sports. So having visited every NFL stadium, bring a kind of a unique perspective to the current debate. I also am a freelance sports correspondent working for ArtVoice and artvoice.com. We cover the Buffalo Sabres and Buffalo Bisons, so some media engagement there.
I want to add in that Andy is also an excellent political consultant, commentator, very knowledgeable guy. Well, no, you can come off the bench. You can come off the bench when you're needed. He also runs an exterminating business, and there's a crossover here. When he's a consultant, I call him Andy the Exterminator. He exterminates the opposition. Ryan, how about you?
So I'm Ryan Miller. I am a local physician on my last year of residency through UB. I kind of got into this over the summer when kind of shocked a lot of people that the Pagulas were pushing for Orchard Park. I think there was a lot of momentum, at least there seemed to be, towards this all happening in the city. And once they came out with this proposal, I was just kind of, disgusted basically, and, felt like I wanted to kind of do everything in my power to really see if I could, impact this in some way. So I started, writing for Buffalo Rising, just kind of giving some feedback and insights into the whole process. And in doing that, I kind of met Ben and the work that he was doing with Rocco Termini, launching Bills in Buffalo, the kind of the media campaign. And through that, Ben and I have started to work together pretty closely since the early fall on this.
What's your medical specialty going to be?
Family medicine, so like primary care.
Good. I'm looking for somebody. Hurry up and get done.
All right.
Ben.
Ben Siegel, one of the co-founders of Bills in Buffalo, and I am a architectural designer, principal of BMS Design, and I've been working for Rocco Termini for 12 years as his head of design and development. So echoing what Ryan said, pretty much, that we both kind of came together on parallel paths, and we were both fighting for the same thing. He had a lot of things to offer, so did I. So we've kind of taken this by the reins and just said, let's run with it and trying to fight the powers that be. And, we have successful days and we have days that are pretty rough, but until there's an announcement, we're just going to keep pushing.
And you guys are bib.
That's right.
Right? And there's a sign on my lawn. I still have a couple signs. Somebody wants one.
Well, Ben, here we are in mid-March, and there's been this impending announcement of a stadium deal, but negotiations are ongoing. Where are we at? Where do you think the whole process is at this point in time with the state budget due on April 1st?
I think it's going exactly the way that the state, the county, the Pagulas, the Bills have wanted, which is no transparency, keep everything as quiet as possible, wait until the last possible minute for any announcement, any decision, and they're going to wait until literally the last second when the budget comes out or just before that to announce anything, because then you can't take it and put it under a microscope, which is what we've been fighting for this entire time, right? Is just let us see what's going on. Let us know what the negotiations are and listen to the constituents on what they actually want. But they're doing this behind closed doors, and as we've discussed before, there might be some political ramifications to this, that they haven't fulfilled their end of the bargain, the Bills or the county. So we'll see where it goes.
And quite frankly, not only won't we be able to put it under a microscope before, it'll probably be years before we actually figure out what got done along the way.
Well, it's amazing how we got here, because Bills ownership transferred in 2014. At the time, they were 2 years into a crafted 10-year lease to keep our stadium functional and moving until more permanent solutions could be found. Part of that process was impaneling a stadium board. They met all but once, with a lot of political hacks and a salad of people who had really no qualifications to offer any light on that. They received and filed their mission statement and shut down. And when the Pegulas took ownership of the Bills, it was, well, at the appropriate time, we will begin discussion on funding a stadium and planning for a stadium. And Terry, who's not really, very, camera and microphone savvy, just kind of demurred on the issue for years and years and years. And all of a sudden, it's 2021. We're now, 10 games away from that lease being over. And now there's this big urgency to have this thing created and get done.
And where are we moving to? We're Austin, right? We're moving to Austin and we don't get our stadium, isn't that it?
Well, I don't think that was...
Or is that El Paso? Where are we moving to?
Ryan, I don't know if that was an official edict by the team. I think it was kind of thrown out there. And it's almost like Vladimir Putin putting, soldiers on the border and, saber rattling. But of course, that's part of our Buffalo DNA and our fear,
Right.
being a small market, that we, do anything that doesn't toe the line, they're going to move and they'll pack and leave.
Yeah. Just to interject a little bit, most politicians, for some reason, are convinced that the Bills are a 10% vote margin. If they're against the Bills, they lose 10%. So if you're a politician and in your last election you won by 8 points, you have to do what the Bills say. That's all there is to it. If you want to survive, and they have that in their head.
I think relocation is really the thing that the Pegulas have leveraged the most in their negotiations with Governor Hochul and Executive Poloncarz. Buffalo definitely has this complex of inferiority and just kind of assuming the worst is going to happen. But I think in this situation, we're, in some ways right to be fearful of relocation. It's only in the past several years, there's been 3 NFL teams that have relocated. So, it's not like it's just like this made up threat. But when you look at it a little bit closer about what would actually have to happen for the Pegulas to relocate, there's a fee of about $500 million that they would have to pay to the NFL just to have the right to leave. That's not like, going towards anything in a new city. That's just to have the right to leave Buffalo, $500 million. Now, if you hear the reports about how much the Pegulas are willing to contribute here for the stadium, they're trying to get away with even less than that just to stay. So I think, that's on the mind of Governor Hochul and Executive Poloncarz. They don't want the Bills to leave. They bring an economic impact to this region, and they are part of our identity about, what makes Buffalo Buffalo. There's no denying that. I don't think any politician wants to be responsible for the Bills leaving Buffalo. That's something that ends a political career. But, there's still a responsibility to, when you're about to sign over $1 billion of taxpayer money, to ensure that there's some kind of meaningful, thoughtful plan and in place to ensure that the people here actually benefit. And right now that just does not seem to be the case. It seems like they're quite frankly just rolling over to whatever the Pegulas want, which, despite the recommendation of their own research studies, is apparently an open air stadium in suburban Orchard Park.
I think the economic part is the most important part of this. I think the reason most of us want it in the city has nothing to do with, we just want a pretty city for games, or we want it closer to where we live or our offices. It was purely an economic argument from day one that $1 billion, it's insane amount of money in one of the 3 poorest cities in the United States, and you're going to maintain the status quo. Open air, Orchard Park, no spin-off development. There's the racial aspect. to this whole thing that it was same thing with the Kensington, same thing with UB being built in Amherst instead of downtown, that this, white flight out of the city, and we're not going to correct those things. You build it in the city, at least if there's no football team here in 50 years, we have infrastructure built up around it. We have a neighborhood that's fixed. We have an extended light rail. We
have a convention center.
Right, a convention center.
We can have concerts there all year round.
Exactly. And that's exactly the point, is if you're going, we own this, right? As the taxpayers, we're going to own the majority of this stadium. So if we're going to own the stadium, how are we benefiting from the stadium? Just in the simple sense, as Peter says, of using it. We're going to build it for them. They use it in Orchard Park. You put a dome on it. You put it downtown. We can have so many different events there. Those events are going to help local hotels, local restaurants, bars, everything. And we don't think that way. We're going to do the expedient, cheap thing because that's what's going to get everyone reelected, and we're going to regret it, just like we do with all the other decisions made in the city. It's a shame.
Can we talk a little bit more about economic input or impact here, Ryan? Because quite frankly, I'm a big skeptic. One of the ones that I use, and I'm not going to mention the guy's name, but I don't know how much money you're going to make in your family practice, but I'll bet you're not going to make $10 million a year. The Bills had a defensive end, a reserve defensive end, who was supposedly a great rusher. I'm not going to mention his name. I think he's being replaced by Von Miller. I hope he is. And welcome, Von. Welcome to Buffalo. Love you. Hall of Famers, great to have you. And somebody better catch Mahomes next time. $10 million a year, 3-year contract, $3 million. You know how many tackles this guy had in the last game that we lost? None. Not only didn't he get a sack, I'm not even sure he got a rush. Okay? That's one hell of a lot of money to be spending in one of the poorest cities in the country for a guy. And you know what? I'm sure he's kind to his mother. He's a wonderful guy. I'll bet he's good to cats and dogs, whatever. But, I mean, just how much money do we have? Let's go to the east side. I spent greater part of last weekend fighting to stop a slaughterhouse up the road at Fillmore and Kensington that was going to be dumped into a black neighborhood that's trying to, revive itself. It's trying to make a comeback. And the way the city handled it was beyond belief. In fact, just as a little ad here, I've still got an offer out, free lunch to anybody who can come up with a way the city could have screwed it up worse. This is the background that we're talking about here. And I'm going to spend $1 billion of public funds on another stadium just like the other one across the street from it in Orchard Park. I mean, right. Okay, economic impact. There's an awful lot of people in Western New York that are hurting economically, that have hurt for generations. Is sports, is this really worth it?
A couple of things on that. So yeah, there's a lot of research, and I think Investigative Post had an article about this in December, where they, I don't know if it was their research or research that they just reviewed, basically equated a new stadium as having the economic impact of opening like a new Target store. Now the
wow.
The caveat of
it's not going to change my life.
The caveat to that though is those studies are done on existing historical examples, new stadiums built in the last 50 years or so. And in the last 50 years, there has been one example of a franchise relocating from the suburbs to the city. So those studies are looking at stadiums built in the city. They build a new one nearby in the city, or city leaving the suburbs, or suburb and staying in the suburb. And so that makes sense. Like if you're just building something next door, it's not really changing much economically in terms of infrastructure.
Where are we talking about?
What
city are we talking about?
Well, you're talking about Detroit?
Yeah.
You want to say?
Yeah. You didn't mention the one, but yeah, Detroit, which is another
right.
Rust Belt poor city.
Right.
It's a perfect example.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure, Andrew, you've been right to downtown Detroit. What do you think?
Multiple times. It's the turnaround in what was a bombed out urban core has been remarkable. Detroit is now years ahead of where Buffalo wants to be in terms of a mixed use 24/7 urban core. And the sports venues have been some of the drivers of that.
And the funny part is, and not to interrupt, they might have major league teams there, but it's very similar that they have a football stadium, they have a baseball stadium, they have a hockey basketball arena in one district, which is essentially what we're looking for in the city is having those bookends and then infill in between them. And how long ago was Detroit? When was that?
Well, Ford
moved?
Field opened in 2002. Little Caesars Arena opened in 2017. So, and that we have, we kind of do a little bit of a ranking, and we have ranked on the hockey experience that Detroit Red Wings have the best arena in the NHL.
Really?
It's whimsical and, subjective. Others might take a different take.
Couple octopus thrown on the ice.
But just, well, not the octopus, but their building is, imagine our atrium at KeyBank Center multiplied by about 10 with shops, probably a dozen restaurants, all kinds of retail. It just, statues and memorabilia, it's just a feast to the eye. And the thing is, it's open every day, as is the Green Bay Packers, Titletown and Lambeau Field. They did a renovation. This was just a basic old, mid 20th century stadium with stenciled numbers on wooden seats, and reskinned the whole building and added Sports Hall of Fame and museum, restaurants, banquet facilities, all kinds of things that makes the tourists want to go there and visit and spend time. And that, I think, is the biggest frustration about the proposed new stadium in Orchard Park. It'll be used 10 times a year, throw in a couple marquee concerts, and you're sitting amidst an ocean of asphalt, and we're going to be paying the county to maintain it and plow it and keep it functional. And if you come into an urban setting, it could be so much more.
And we're not the first people to do this. That's what I keep telling everyone is, Byron Brown comes out saying it's too difficult. So, if you're confronted with something
everything's
that's
difficult for Byron Brown.
it turns out to be the case. But our contemporary cities, our peer cities, and we've looked at everyone, Green Bay, Minnesota, Detroit, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, Cincinnati.
Atlanta, Minneapolis, Seattle.
Right, won't be Rust Belts, but right.
Okay.
All downtown, cold weather cities, other than maybe Baltimore, but cold weather cities, downtown stadiums, within a quarter mile of the city center. So these other cities can do it. Chicago, even though they might be moving to the suburbs.
Well, the last stadium that in this century that has opened in the exurbs has been Gillette Stadium in Foxborough, and that was the same situation, built across the street from the old stadium.
Right.
But every stadium that has been built since then has been an urban-based venue with connections to commuter rail, metro rail.
Yeah.
Less parking.
Tell us about Toronto, Andy. I really like the Rogers Dome. In fact, apparently they were going to tear it down, and I was thinking it's kind of like St. Gerard's on Bailey Avenue. Somebody was going to tear down the Catholic Church and move it to Arizona or something, and I guess they stopped that. The Rogers Dome is what, 30 years old?
1989.
Okay, so why don't we, when they tear that down and replace it in Toronto, why don't we buy the pieces and put that in downtown Buffalo? Their old used stadium would be better than just another one across the street with no roof on it, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, from a football standpoint, it's not. It's was the last of the mixed use baseball football stadiums. And
also
and
soccer, by the way, and
done.
motocross, and concerts, and conventions, and everything else. And it goes 7x24. It's right on the metro. Whenever I go to watch the Blue Jays, we get off in Mississauga or whatever it is, and take the train all the way in, and you walk a little bit, and you're in the stadium. Why don't we do that?
Well, okay, brick by brick, that stadium is not an NFL stadium. Okay, and the Bills with that horrible experiment a few years back, and it was a money grab, and it failed miserably. And even the Toronto people didn't want to support it there because they love coming to Buffalo and tailgating, and that's their weekend in our big city.
And they didn't pay attention to the game either. That was the part I liked the most when the Bills played up there. Everybody was they were in the hotel rooms fooling around. Drinking, playing pinochle, whatever. Nobody was watching football.
A lot of that is, as Andrew points out, it's not set up as a good stadium for football. Like the new trend is more intimate, steeper seating, so you're closer to the field and not so far away. So I think, you can do all these other things, and that's the future too, is build this as a huge soccer fan, that you can have soccer, that you can have lacrosse.
Track the MLS.
Right, and it has to. And everyone says you can't use it as a convention center. Places have done that. There's ways of creating that through retractable seating, and
you could bring UB football downtown. That stadium is god-awful out there in Amherst.
I'm watching March Madness right now, looking at all the activity that we're having downtown,
Right.
even though we're not selling out games, but I think that a lot of that's COVID related.
It was packed yesterday.
Yeah, yesterday was a lot
it was
better.
awesome.
For sure. But having that activity, that we could have that every year. We could have the finals like Lucas Oil
Yep.
has in Indianapolis, which is such an amazing venue. It's a perfect example of what the city could
We
have.
get the NFL Combine every year.
Yep, the draft,
See,
and a bunch of other things.
I like the cross fertilization. I'm so stupid. A friend of mine and I, a few years back, went up to Toronto on a Wednesday, and we took the day off and went just to sightsee. You know, when it wasn't high touristy, and you could take a tour of the Rogers Center. It was like 14, 16 bucks. Okay, I mean, we're dumb enough to do that. It's fascinating. You know, they have 3 separate fields. Okay, it's baseball, soccer, football. They have a different field for every team. When we were there, they were setting it up to do motocross, you know, motorcycle racing with dirt on the floor.
Well, I'll take
That's
it
the
one.
kind of facility I want to see us have.
I'll take it one step further. When I mentioned 124 sports venues, that's only in the 4 sports. My sports partner Peter Farrell and I have traveled worldwide. We've been to actually over 560 separate venues across the realm of sports. We went to the Euro 2016 soccer championships in France and caught the high-speed rails and went city hopping, and it was just an epic, amazing trip. And the one stadium that jumped out at us was called, I think, Pierre Mauroy Stadium in Lille. And that was one of the host venues. And of course, they have in the French Premier League, they have a soccer team, football, as they call it. The stadium is actually multi-purpose, that you can section off half of the building and turn it into a hockey or basketball venue. And not one of these silly configurations where you've got weird portable bleachers and the high curtain. I mean, they just
And
make
half
it.
the fans are looking at the side of some bleachers. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
You can actually see the game.
That's how last year for the NCAA tournament in Indianapolis, they took Lucas Oil Stadium and turned it into 2 different venues. And it worked, but it was weird and it wasn't greatest for watching basketball. But here you've got a self-contained hockey or basketball arena that can be configured in that building. And you can do soccer and football, and it's a convention center, and it has a multitude of uses, and it's a gorgeous building and so usable for different applications. And the other beautiful thing, they've got maybe 500 parking spaces there. The whole city connects via their metro system, and they got it set up perfectly that you embark, and nobody and everybody. They have massive stations there, and they move people in and out. You don't drive to a game.
How's the metro out to Orchard Park?
Yeah, we have a master plan for Metro Rail that was fashioned in the late 70s. We built 6 miles of it, and then in came Reagan, and to hell with building public transit. And now, incredibly, that we're shifting to light, and light rail's being built all over the country. Our congressman says we don't need light rail to Amherst. Let's do some electric buses.
I got to interject something here.
Different topic, but it astounds me.
But it's related. I was the last law school class. We graduated in '73 that actually went to school downtown.
You're aging yourself.
Of course, I'm old, guys. I'm in my 78th year. And as Casey Sengel used to say, most of the people my age are dead, and you could look it up. Jake Hyman was a former dean, and he loved to tell us that the reason they agreed to go out to Amherst was because they were guaranteed that the rapid transit would be in place to whisk them from the Amherst campus to downtown. Okay? How long ago was that? We're talking 50 years ago. And how much further are we now with the rapid transit? Not an inch. Okay? So we're way behind in everything. But, if you had something downtown, if there was a reason for people to go downtown, maybe they would go downtown. There are other impediments, quite frankly. People in the suburbs don't want poor people and minorities coming out to see them. And, we have cases, on point with respect to that. But I just want to change a little something here, Andy. With the wealth of expertise, with the amount of time and effort that you put into this, I mean, even me, I'm a nose picker, okay? I've spent some time going to Toronto to look at things. I like the way the University of Toronto integrates with the city. I mean, University Avenue in Toronto cradles the university. It's right part of it. Do you see that with the university at Buffalo? It was of Buffalo when I went there.
And there's also Ryerson University, which is around Church. They've actually taken the old Maple Leaf Gardens and turned it into a combined Loblaws, junior hockey rink, basketball rink, library. It's fascinating, the multitude of uses that came out of that. We tore down our odd and turned it into a hole in the ground. And here it is 13 years later, and we're still nose picking about what to do.
With the wealth of experience you've got, and let me send another. If Poloncarz and Brown want to go visit the Rogers Center, no matter how much it costs to take the tour, I mean, it's probably up to $25 now, but $25 Canadian is like $3 American. If they want to,
the ruble's worse.
I'll pay for the cost of it. Okay, with your degree of expertise. But if they want to go, I'll pay their entrance fee. Maybe they should take a look around and see what's possible in the world. With all the expertise, with all the experience, I'm sure that the local politicians and the people who are the shakers and movers are contacting you every day. Your phone must be ringing off the hook, asking you for advice as to how we should do this, right?
It's not. I have offered, well, let's talk about our core political people. I'd love to have your input on this. Because, Peter, like you, we have given a lifetime of money, time, advocacy, expertise to elect Democrats and it's mostly a Democratic, community here in terms of elected officials.
That's the overlay.
And we, some of the people who are in office today, setting policy, making decisions, are there because people like you and I offered our time.
Full disclosure, Ben's a Democratic Party officer. I know that.
I'm a committee member, but I'm disenchanted. The reason
Come on, you're a poop boy. I know what you're like.
Yeah.
Well, here's my biggest disappointment about the whole process. And Bob Duffy was lieutenant governor, and he saw the forest for the trees. And he ran that stadium board, and he was a big advocate of let's go big and let's do this and let's plan it now. Then he resigned and left, and then Kathy Hochul became lieutenant governor. And I don't think she had that same level of passion. But here we are today, and every layer of government, our congressman, let's go at the top, our governor, because that's where the money's coming from, our Buffalo congressman, our state assembly and Senate delegation, our mayor, our county executive, our county legislature, our city council. Not one individual has raised their hand and says, whoa, let's take a pause.
Well, I will say City Council has been very supportive of this. Rasheed Wyatt, and they've been on board.
And they had the hearings. I was sorry I couldn't attend. And
county did too, by the way. And it
was virtual. I was going to go.
And Poloncarz was not present for that.
I think Joe Larigo on the county legislature, of all people, probably the most conservative, farthest to the right legislator, who actually, he does his homework. He works very hard. I agree with him on a lot of things, not everything, obviously. Our basic political philosophies are a mile apart. But I think he's pretty much said, wait a minute, we had hearings, and everybody wanted a stadium downtown. Where are we going?
That's interesting, because this is what Ryan and I have been discussing more and more. So we're sending out letters to every state assembly member, senator, local politicians, really summing up our belief. We also have a great new partner in the local chapter of the NAACP. Is fully on board with this now, and they're looking at legal action. But it's become bipartisan, and that's the amazing thing. Is from day one we were looking at it from very much a left-leaning. Treat it as a social program as well, that if we're going to spend this money, we can help people. So what we keep saying now is, Democrats want it because it's socially responsible, and Republicans want it because it's fiscally responsible to actually spend this money and get something out of it. Stefan Mihailou supports a downtown stadium. Joe Larigo, Republicans, and we have so much in common. It's just that our elected officials, who happen to be Democratic, don't support it for whatever reason.
And I would actually, I don't know. I would suspect actually that, if it was up to Kathy Hochul, if it was up to Mark Poloncarz, the stadium would be going in the city. I don't know that. I just suspect that based on the way
they're afraid of the 10%, I guess.
I think I think they don't want to be responsible for the bills leaving. I mean, if you look at Ben shared the other day on our Facebook group the way Kathy Hochul was talking about intercity highway removal here in Buffalo, with Kensington. To restore Humboldt Parkway on top of it, which is just, has been necessary for. Kensington never should have happened, but the way she's talking is about, restoring your urban core, how important infrastructure is, undoing the wrongs, racially motivated wrongs of the mid 20th century.
Here, I'll quote it real quick. So this
Sure.
is so funny. I'd love for Kathy. You could say she's speaking about the stadium in this situation.
Right.
She says, "We're going to reverse the damage done more than half a century ago. We cannot let this moment slip by, and we won't. Infrastructure is about connections. We need to connect neighborhoods that were severed by asphalt highways disproportionately impacting communities of color. These projects will help right the wrongs of the past through safer and reliable transit networks, landscapes designed to bring communities together, and routes that are friendlier for pedestrians and bikers.
So she wants a stadium downtown?
You would think so.
No. No, how, look at, just had a brilliant idea, okay? She wants to cover up the 33. And by the way, I'm skeptical about that because it's not going to be 1960 again. We already destroyed the urban core. I'm not sure that makes it. How about if we build a long, narrow stadium and put it on top of the 33? I think that solves all our problems.
Kill two birds with one
Can
stone,
we
right?
play football in like a mile-long stadium? Never mind. Excuse me, I just went crazy for a minute there.
You know, one thing I know, Ryan, if you could talk about, I think it's important to understand is, yeah, it's going to cost more to put it in the city.
Right.
It's going to take more time. That's just the reality of it. But what's the actual math on that? Like, how does that work out? How expensive is this really?
So the Pagula's own studies quote the cost of building in the city to be 1.8 billion, and Orchard Park to be 1.4 billion. If you look at the difference, that $400 million difference over 30 years, it is about $13 million a year extra to go in the city. That in context of like an annual New York State budget, this year the New York State budget is $212 billion. So we're talking 0.006% of the budget to put the stadium in the city. And that's not even, considering these extra revenue streams with, sports gambling, marijuana. New York generated $70 million in tax revenue in 1 month of sports gambling. If we just set aside January to July 2022 sports gambling revenue, there's your downtown stadium.
You know what, that's not even what the state spends on postage in a day. I mean, we're talking a trivial amount of money here.
And we got to remember too, this money, it's not just us paying in the county, it's the whole state. So if we don't spend the money here, it's just going to go somewhere else. They give, it blows my mind that Governor Hochul gave $500 million to New York City to boost tourism. New York City, who doesn't know where New York City is and what New York City has to offer? And they need all that extra money, or $7 billion for Penn Station and some of the new subway lines that they're putting underneath the Hudson. They're spending so much money downstate, but on good things in the urban core, on infrastructure, transportation, things like that. And we can't come up with an additional 2 years of construction and an additional, $500 million to make our city better. It's insane.
The Pagulas are just going to say, well, that's fine. We're going to leave. If you don't like it, we're going to leave. There's plenty of other cities out there that would happily have us. And I think that we need to call their bluff. And I think, this is something Ben and I have been talking about. I think we should offer to pay for all of it. Say, listen, Terry, Kim, if you want to build this stadium in Orchard Park, be our guest, but you guys are going to have to pay for it because we're not benefiting. We'll give you enough to keep you here, but
We'll build the roads and do the sewers.
We'll
for
give
you.
you
How's that?
a little bit, but if you if you want to be we'll offer you the entire thing in the city. No, all funded by taxpayers because the taxpayers are the ones that they're paying for it. They need to benefit. I don't see how the Pagulas. I mean, if they're smart business people and they're offered that chance to have a stadium built for them entirely by taxpayer money with the stipulation that it has to be in the city, there's no way they turn that down. There's no way.
And legally they can't, because if they turn it down and they try to leave, you're going to have a St. Louis situation where, the city of St. Louis won $700 million because they did have interest in keeping the team. They were going to fund the team and keep them there, but then they moved to LA and now they're paying $700 million. So,
You know where the Rams started, by the way?
Los Angeles.
yeah.
Cleveland.
You're right.
They're the Cleveland
I
Rams.
defer.
They should put that franchise on
Yeah.
wheels and just move it
I
around.
believe it. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Cleveland Rams.
They had two teams.
It's easy to be Pagula bashers. I would call their bluff. Terry or Kim did not step to a microphone and say we're in talks with Austin. That was one of their negotiators who kind of threw that out, knowing that would immediately instill fear. We'd be thinking about Bills in Seattle in 1970, which was the threat at the time.
Yep.
And that reverberates with us. I truly believe and they don't expose themselves much to the public. They remain cocooned and speak through others. But I truly believe deep in their hearts that they really care about this community. Terry especially has a love and affinity for Buffalo. I think that they would be loath to leave, but I think also that the pendulum in that PSC organization has switched a lot, especially they were hard by the pandemic. And now it's all about monetizing, revenue generation, maximizing what can they make. That's how billionaires think. We have to fill our bellies even further. Even Ralph Wilson went to Toronto. Why? It wasn't about expanding our fan base. It was we can double the revenues for 1 game, 2 games a year, and it blew up in their face.
Sorry to interrupt, but that's the point. It's like they're business owners. They don't have any responsibility or obligation to this community to worry about the future. They, at the end of the day, have to look out for themselves, and we can't fault them for that, right? I mean,
yeah,
you said, they've been good to this community. Mm-hmm. That responsibility is Kathy Hochul and Mark Polenkar's. All right, and you have a study commissioned by the Pagulas that says it's best for the region, it's best economically for the region, it's best for us, the Pagulas, in terms of revenue generation, to put it in the city. How are they ignoring that? Why are they ignoring that? Why do they not have to get up in front of somebody and explain why they're ignoring that before they get to spend $1 billion of our money?
Well, of all the elected officials that we've talked about, the biggest disappointment in my eyes is my friend Mark Polenkar's. Throughout this entire process, he has been resolute in we do not need a new stadium. Let's sign a 99-year lease and stay at the Ralph or Rich or Highmark, whatever you want to call it.
Whatever it is today.
And yeah, exactly. That's a whole nother show. And he is the landlord. The county is the landlord, and he drove a lot of this debate. And, and when in the rare occasions I run into him, I would say, Mark, you've got to start looking at what other cities are doing. And we are falling way behind. We have a barely functional building. And it wasn't all just about, let's build a shiny new playpen for $1 billion. I talked about Arrowhead Stadium. They put $500 million into a stadium that's 1 year older than ours, and it is state of the art. But they are open air. You're still subject to the elements. Talk to the people that went down there last month. But nonetheless, his feeling was, let's do the minimum possible and let's just keep this train moving. And now here we are. We lost 8 years of planning time to go big because the county, the chief officer of the county says we don't need a stadium. And he finally, when the engineers finally issued the report and saying the upper decks are ready to crumble in about 4 years, he finally demurred and says, okay, the state's going to give us $1 billion and let's put a new stadium up.
See, his planning horizon wasn't that long. He figured he'd be out of here by then. He'd be in Congress or whatever.
That's the problem, the political landscape and having terms and everyone wanting to move up that, Andrew Cuomo dropped the ball on this because he was too busy being America's governor during the pandemic and not focusing on this and writing his book and obviously doing other extracurricular activities.
He's coming back.
He might be, but that's the problem is everyone thinks I'll just put it off until the next politician, they'll handle it. I don't need to. So the 2014, when the lease was signed with the Pagulas, and this comes to the legal aspect, which I'm sure Peter will understand, it talks about having that stadium committee and getting together, which they met one time. I think they allocated $1 million for them to meet, to do what they needed to do. They met.
Must have been a meeting, huh? Hell of a meeting.
I didn't know about $1 million.
Sounds like a Jewish
They met at the
wedding.
Central Library.
Sounds like a Jewish wedding,
and they closed it to the public.
Well, no, they gave that million should they need it. So it was
okay.
As needed. It was allocated to them.
Punch and pie.
Yeah, exactly. So they just had one meeting, spent a couple bucks. But within the lease, it talks about that it's in the lease as legal language that you have to have the stadium committee put together that will look for the best solution for a new stadium in 2014. They met one time. Now, if that's not a breach of contract, as a county taxpayer, that we had a deal with the Buffalo Bills and Pagulas and the NFL.
That empowered that board.
That gave that board power. They never met. They never did anything. Nobody's seen anything that came up. And then it was just pushed off for 7 years. So that's what we've talked with the NAACP about. We've talked to a lawyer or two about is there any way just to pause this? And it's interesting now that a lot of this came down to the stadium's going to collapse, right? Everyone's worried. Investigative Post had another FOIL request to see the engineering report done by DiDonato Associates on how bad the stadium truly is. I believe they're making progress on that. So just like the private study that the Pagulas didn't want to release because there was proprietary information, there was all this other stuff, and then they did the Christmas Eve dump and did release it. Turns out they didn't want it released because it showed that downtown was a better site. So the fact that they're not releasing this engineering report, I find it hard to believe, and I've spoken to 2 structural engineers that know the building well. It's hard to believe that they can say 4 years it's going to fall down. If that's the case, who wants to sit on that upper deck 3 years from now? If within 365 days it's going to fall down.
I don't want to be under it either.
It's not
Even
true.
worse,
Right.
under it.
It's a brick shit house, as one structural engineer described it to me. Like, yeah, there's some deficiencies, but we can't let that dictate the time frame that we have to hurry up, build this new stadium in the suburbs. It's cheap, it's quick, or else it's going to fall down. You know what? If we got to go play at UB for a season, so be it. You know what I mean? Or go play in Syracuse, or go to Toronto again
Ken
if we have
East.
to. Hamilton,
Whatever we have.
Ken East. There you go. So I just don't believe anything that's coming out from PSE, that they're trying to hide information, the county, the state, that they're just leaving all of us in the dark, and it's done on purpose. That's the sad thing, is it's malicious. It's no, we don't want people to have all the facts. It's your money, but you can't have the facts to understand how you're spending your money. It's immoral to me.
Well, here's another fascinating thing that's coming, that we're getting the drip of information. I believe the gentleman's name is Ron Rakuya. He's the lead negotiator for PSE. And now, number one, we're told, this is going to be 62,000 seats. Most will be covered. It'll be open air. There'll be a 5,000 seat party deck. Yet, the announcement last week, we're hiring Populous to design the stadium.
Amen.
That stadium has been designed. It is in a drawer somewhere with lots of locks, and they know exactly what it's going to look like. They know exactly how it's going to be configured. The public is seeing none of it. And now, mid-March, they're saying, we're going to have focus groups. We're going to invite the community to come in to give their opinions. This should have been done in 2015 as part of that stadium board. The community was ready to talk.
Yep.
We did a kind of a groundbreaking cover story for Art Voice in 2014. And it got a lot of great discussion from all ends of the spectrum. But that was a community debate that was healthy and needed. We have yet to have that debate as an entire community. But now PSC wants to have focus groups come in. And what are we going to talk about? The color of paint in the men's room, or
Exactly.
or the $16 cans of beer? It's
Lipstick on the
outrageous.
corpse. That's what I want to talk about.
And I'm
What color?
and they have not been transparent. And then I've only seen a little bit of it because I haven't had a chance to look into it. And Buffalo Business First has a paywall. I don't subscribe. Now there's some shadowy group of business figures, some of the most people who have just led this community down the rotten hole. And a lot of them are off to the wind. And I'll call them out. Jordan Levy, the failed hole at Canal Side, and John Dandies, who just seems to show up to whatever. And these people in this partnership are now secretly kind of advising the Pagulas. And for how can we extract more money from the state, from us, to give to them?
By the way, that ain't a partnership. That's known as the Chamber of Commerce. That's a DBA they use. And it's not a partnership. I find it hard to believe that something that's not a partnership can have partnership in the name, and the state of New York says that's okay.
But
Nonsense.
it's like, who are these people?
Who
And
are
now
they partners with?
why are they showing up now? Their names out of this, like I say, this whole shadowy process that we have not had a seat at the table to, and the public has not, and yet it's all done deal.
I'll
Let's
tell
go.
you why. Exactly. It's their way of saying we had community outreach, but they're reaching out to big businesses, to people that don't always have a great track record. Even the Business Backs the Bills group that was set up by, forgot which company it was, one of the companies that has affiliation with the Bills and the Sabres. Everyone that's on that list, it's Simonelli, it's a bunch of people that do marketing for them, it's lawyers from Lippis, Matthias, it's everyone that has a vested interest
Let's be
in
nice
the
to
Bills.
lawyers here, Ben.
Yeah,
And in the
Well,
status
sensitive.
quo.
exactly.
And then let's
That's
just-
not community outreach. Community outreach is going over to the east side or going to the Elmwood Village and going to other places in the county. People that I know tailgate that live in Orchard Park are for a downtown stadium, and it happens to be 2 of them are Republicans. They're actually for it. So do true community outreach, and they keep pretending that this is outreach. This is, we're working with them, we're working with them. You're working with people that are well-to-do, that have businesses. Some failed, some succeeded, and you're going to say, yeah, we talk to the community. I mean, it's disingenuous. It shows how out of touch a lot of these people are, that they don't understand sitting in the 300s at a playoff game when it's 0 degrees and spending.
That's where
your
Governor
last-
Hochul's going to be sitting at the new stadium, by the way. She'll be bundled up.
Yeah,
By the way,
exactly.
You believe that?
The Mark Scheer article in Investigative Post recently, which talks about this stadium being out of touch with, modern development, the whole 9 yards. He points out, he talks to a couple of town councilmen in Orchard Park, and they haven't heard anything about this. Okay, it's not just the people of the city of Buffalo, the people who live on the east side, the government leaders in the town where they build this damn thing are being shut up. I'm like, what is this, the Wizard of Oz?
And the
Pay
two-
no attention to the man behind a curtain? Well, who's behind a curtain?
The two politicians that have disappointed me more than anybody else, it's one thing for someone at the table like County Executive Poloncarz to have some shortcomings. Right now he has to kind of be quiet, he has to play this right, but people that had no skin in the game, that just needed to shut their mouths, being Mayor Byron Brown and Representative Brian Higgins. Now, I've never, in all my years of following politics, I'm 40 years old, and I consider myself a political buff. I've never seen politicians come out and literally say, put it outside of my constituents' area.
I surrender.
Because Brian Higgins he ends just north of the current stadium in Orchard Park. So he's saying, take a massive $1.5 billion infrastructure project and put it in an adjacent community. Byron Brown, the exact same thing. Put it in, and all they have to say is, I would love to have it in my community. I would do everything
Right.
I can if that's something that's possible. And right now I don't have a seat at the table, but I would love to.
I'm keeping an open mind. Something. No, they
Yeah.
surrendered immediately.
You already have
No,
your
we're
city council that's like actively pushing for it, and you have Byron who's just not only, it would be great if he would say something like that, or say, oh, hey, we can come up with this kind of funding or this kind of thing to lure you into the city. He doesn't even, if he doesn't say it, if he could just not say anything, like if you don't have anything nice
Don't
to
surrender.
say, just shut the hell up.
Don't surrender. How about that? Just so you know, this is Brian Higgins' country, right here, okay? North Buffalo. We've never seen him. He's never been north of Chippewa, okay? He goes all the way up to Niagara Falls now. Can you believe that?
Yep.
The people in DeVoe suddenly are represented by Brian Higgins. Oh
Look,
my
I'm gonna
God.
have to leave early, but the one thing I do want to bring up is some of the conflicts of interest that are going on, which I know, Andrew, I think you spoke about on maybe Nate McMurray's, or I heard someone else talk about it. The idea that politically everyone's scared, that's politics, so they don't want to be responsible for them leaving. But behind the scenes, the fact that the Pagulas hired Legends Global Partnership, right? So people that don't know, it's owned by Jerry Jones and the group that owns the Yankees, the Steinbrenners, and some other people. So they hired them as a political, or as a consultant on this stadium, what they should do, where they should build it, brought them in to help out. Now, Jerry Jones owns this company. He has a vested interest because of profit sharing in the NFL, that they maximize NFL profits. They're going to advise the Pagulas, do whatever you can to maximize profits. Therefore, you're maximizing my bottom line as another owner in the NFL. You add to that Governor Kathy Hochul and her husband in Delaware North, who have multi-million-dollar contracts for concessions at the stadium. So there's another conflict. Most people don't know it, too, that AECOM, that Ron Rakuya, his daughter works for AECOM. So it's just this circle of, and I realize there's only so many companies when it comes to, Populous, AECOM, HOK, that do stadium design, consulting, Legends, but it just looks really bad that, even Ron Rakuya should have come out and at least said, my daughter does work for this company who's doing a report, and has some transparency to it. But nobody knows that. Nobody has asked that question. So I think there's conflicts of interest all over the place that make this even more of a shady dealing. Not just the lack of transparency, but the actual people in the room and what they have to lose or gain based on these negotiations.
Well, okay, we're wrapping it up, and just
Well, you guys can keep talking.
April 1st is, might be Stadium $1 billion day. What's the next step? You've championed the Bills and Buffalo cause, and we realizing, and here's my thought, and I'll just throw that out. You do have a county legislature. They are almost ministerial, but they have a point in the process. And if somebody has the courage and temerity to step up and say, hold off, and I hate to sound like I'm promoting obstructionism,
right?
Because there's one thing in this community, I can't stand this whole,
agreed.
That Elmwood Crossing it looks like Dresden there, and we can't even put hanging baskets up. That's another show.
Yep.
But there's got to be a way to put a pause button, and maybe that is the front, that and legal action. What do you think, Ben?
I wish I had more faith. We've spoken with April Baskins, who has probably the most power on the legislature, and she's not asking enough. I respect what she's trying to do, but she's asking for a community benefit agreement, and it's weak. And a lot of the things in a community benefit agreement, because it's going to be state money coming in anyways, it already has to be done when it comes to women and minority hiring, some of these other things. It's not asking enough. And what we've asked her is to support a downtown stadium, because you essentially don't need a community benefit agreement at that point. But she is adamant that that's all she wants out of this is a community benefit agreement. I don't know if anyone else, we've spoken to many, we've written letters, if anyone else will stand up. And then I guess it goes to state level. Crystal Peoples-Stokes is a great position of power, just like Kathy is, both from Buffalo, Western New York area. Like, when is that going to happen again, that we have the two most powerful people in Albany are women from Buffalo?
And what are we getting out of it?
Exactly. So
that's what I want to know.
I wish she would stand up. I mean, that's not only does she represent the state and the assembly, but her own district is on the east side of Buffalo, stretching up into this area. And I would love for her to take a stand, because they control the purse strings at the end.
Our assemblyman.
But I guess the problem is everyone is scared that they're going to feel like obstructionists like that. If they're like, we're not saying move away, we're not saying we're not funding it, but can we have a 6-month period to wait for Kathy to get reelected, most likely, that she actually won election as the governor. It's not political. It takes the political part of this out, like Peter talked about, the 10%, that she's done, she's in for 4 years. And at that point, we can reassess this, even put a line item in the budget that we're funding the stadium. We're not going to say where that stadium necessarily is going yet. We're working on that logistically, but the money's there. Pagulas are happy, they're staying. The Bills are staying, the community's happy. But let's put a pause on it, have some dialogue with the true community, not just the business community, and figure out what's the right thing to do. We can make a decision in 6 months. Then we go. It's not over yet. It's not over until the deal is signed.
Well, the fat lady sings. Listen, I want to wrap up here. I think this has been a great discussion, but okay. To the kids out in the audience, what can they do? What should they be doing?
Writing letters, making phone calls, handwritten letters are even better, more likely to be read.
Governor, assemblyman, state senator, Congress, county legislature, town officials.
Everybody. I would start with the people in the room, the governor, Mark Poloncarz, and then the county legislator, Crystal Peoples-Stokes, or your own assembly member at the state level. I think is critical, and let them know how you feel. I don't think they're listening, and they need more and more letters and phone calls. If you see them out, tell them, you think it's the right thing to do.
Gentlemen, wrap-ups. What do we got? Doctor, how about you?
Yeah, I would just like to say that kind of no matter what happens, I do think once it's announced, if it's announced, there's going to be a period of 90 days at least where the county legislature can review it. I think a similar period for the state legislature, and so that's why I do think it's important to contact those members as well, because they do have power, and especially at the state level, state legislature members outside of this area probably have very little idea of what is actually going on in terms of how taxpayer money is being spent here. And I think they would probably be, you know, across the aisle, like Ben was saying earlier, you know, fiscally and socially, Republicans and Democrats probably, you know, have some pause if they really knew what exactly is going on here. So trying to bring that to their attention. And I think, you know, for me, the biggest thing with all of this has been infrastructure and public transportation expansion. I think, you know, that is the key to Buffalo's success going forward. And, you know, regardless of what happens, if it's in Orchard Park, if it's in, you know, hopefully if it's in Buffalo, public transportation needs to be intimately linked from the get-go to this project. And so, you know, like we were talking about Titletown earlier, which in Green Bay, it's not in downtown Green Bay. So that is like in the suburbs, so to speak.
The entire city's a suburb.
That's fair, and that's kind of
110,000 population.
Yeah,
but that's kind of what
Buffalo.
Buffalo is becoming. That's what we've done. We've become like one conglomerate of suburbs, and there's nothing in the center that's feeding us anymore. You know, we've just depleted. So, like, Green Bay did a wonderful job, like you're saying, making this development around Titletown. But you know what they also did is put a train that goes directly from downtown Green Bay to Titletown that's free of charge. So, I mean, that needs to be, the rail tracks are there. There's this organization that I'll plug that I really, really support and think need to be considered in all decisions like this, Citizens for Regional Transit. They have put together just like an extremely elegant, thoughtfully researched proposal of existing rail tracks that the city of Buffalo owns that would be natural, you know, for Metro Rail, NFT and Metro Rail expansion. And the reason, I mean, one of the reasons the South Park site makes so much sense is because it's right next to the DLW terminal that we're, you know, pumping a lot of Buffalo Billion money into right now to renovate. There's tracks from the DLW terminal that could go go directly through the east side to the airport. So you connect the airport to downtown Buffalo, to our transit hub.
The right-of-way's in place.
It's in place. You have Amtrak and NFTA building these, you know, centers, these hubs downtown in like the Canal Side district. It's like so obvious. It's like city planning 101. How do you not have your airport connect directly to your city center? So
we had to work at it.
I think, you know, putting it at South Park site makes sense, but if it's not, you gotta run light rail to Orchard Park. And so I think that, you know, regardless of what happens, I would just, you know, urge politicians and the community to be advocating for that. And I think the only one that's done that so far is Assemblymember Burke.
Right, I really like the emphasis on public transport because that satisfies my 7x24 use, day one. If every sports team leaves, we can still use it 7x21.
It's the gas price.
24. I mean, it's great utility to the community.
That is the future. We're gonna. I mean, in 50 years, we're gonna be looking back and being like, we're gonna have no infrastructure. You know, we're gonna be like, we should have done this. This is the next UB North.
And piggybacking on that, because I know you're wrapping up, Peter, that is my thought about the legacy of the decisions being made now. We look back at the campus in Amherst. We look back at the ECC situation. We look back at the expressways in Buffalo.
The limited rapid transit.
And we say,
Solar City.
And we ask, what were they thinking? And I'll throw out the names: Sedita, Pordham, Ludera, the people who made awful decisions for us, and they're gone, and we live with the ramifications of that. 30 years from now, if this train goes the way it's going, it seems to be going right now, the people in Buffalo will look back and saying, what were they doing? What were they thinking? As the new $1.5 billion stadium starts to age and cars become going the way of the dodo bird and no way of getting people back and forth, and we could stop it now and give some clarity to this. And it's just a matter of finding the people with the courage to make the right decisions for this community. And I hope we can help along in that quest.
Gentlemen, great conversation. I hope the people who watch this enjoy it. I hope it's been educational. I want to end this on a high note. You'll notice there's a lot of lights and plants in here. I'm primarily growing flowering plants, a lot of orchids, things like that. We had a PTZ camera. I could zoom around or pan around, we'd say it. But anyhow, if you're watching at home and you have a marijuana plant that you're not using, call me. I'll meet you in a dark alley at night, or you can leave it behind the house.
Or in front of Buffalo Police Headquarters.
Yeah, they probably have the good stuff. Anyways.
It is all legal and taxed.
I'm just looking for one tiny little gift plant. Thank you, everybody. That's a wrap.
Cheers, guys.
Good work.
I'll get you the plant.
You are a colorful person.
You know, I'm over